Ready? Cool. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session on this very historic day. Thank you so much for coming out and being willing to listen to us about our e-commerce challenge, especially in the B2B space. Most of you may have heard about Staples. I'm just going to kind of introduce myself and Ross. So my name is Sunil Unni. I'm responsible for e-commerce application architecture within Staples. I have about 13 years of experience building order management systems and e-commerce platforms. And Ross?
I'm Ross Sanger. I'm also at Staples, but I'm more of an engineer, architect type of technical role. And I'll be covering a lot of our solution later, but my background is in doing a lot of the feature and functionality on the B2B website called Staples Advantage, which Sunil will cover. And I've done a lot of projects enhancing that website and building features and functionalities for our customers.
Cool, thank you. So as far as an agenda goes, I'll talk to you a little bit about what we do at Staples. Most of you may be familiar with it already, but I'll also point out some nuances. We'll talk about the B2B challenge that we've been trying to solve and are almost there. We'll introduce you to some concepts that will help you appreciate the challenge that we have at hand. We'll also talk to you a little bit about our e-commerce platform. It's not going to be a very in-depth discussion, but we'll introduce you just enough so you can, again, appreciate the problem that we have. We'll look at why we ended up using Couchbase, and then what kind of information is stored in Couchbase, and then look at what's the current context of the problem that we're trying to solve and what the solution with Couchbase looks like. And then, obviously, we're not at the end of the journey, so we'll also talk about what the future looks like with the Couchbase solution. So throughout this presentation, please feel free to stop us and ask any questions that you have. You don't have to reserve them to the end. So with that said, I'm going to jump right into a little bit about Staples. So most of you have heard about Staples. How many of you here have placed an order on staples.com or walked into a store? All right, cool. Very nice. Thank you. You've heard of staples.com, which is the public face of the company. We do have a B2B business that I will talk to you about in a few seconds. We're essentially headquartered outside of Boston. We've been in business for about 30 years, span 25 countries. We have about 1,800 stores worldwide, most of which is focused in North America between Canada and the USA. 75,000 associates worldwide. And some of the things that we deal with include technology, facilities and break room, furniture, safety equipment, medical equipment, copy and print services, easy tech services. So if you have a broken PC or a phone, take it into a Staples store to get it repaired. As far as the company structure itself goes, we are divided into what we call the North American stores and online. So it's basically our store operations combined with most of our B2C stuff. We also have North American commercial, which comprises of the majority of our business-to-business B2B operations, as well as supply chain. And then lastly, we have international operations. Within North American commercial, which accounts for about 33% of our total revenues, we have Staples Business Advantage, which is our flagship business that caters to our big contract customers. We also have something called Quill, which was a company that we acquired in the late 90s, which primarily caters to the Midwest market. And then lastly, within Staples Business Advantage, some of the key characteristics of being a Staples Advantage customer is that you get access to specialized pricing, which is negotiated upfront. You also have ordering efficiencies, such as being able to aggregate ordering to a budget center level. You can have an approval flow, so nobody in your organization is able to place an order without having it be approved by a supervisor. What it also comes with is dedicated account management. So as a customer, you have a concierge-style account manager that's actually there to advise you about office supplies or any of your organizational needs. And all of that, of course, comes with best-in-class customer service. Any questions before you move on? Sure.
Is the inventory that serves business commingled with inventory that serves the stores?
Yes.
Repeat the question for the live stream.
Sorry, yeah.
The question was, is the inventory that serves the Staples Business Advantage B2B business, is that inventory commingled, stored together, ordered, whatever, alongside the B2C? I'm trying to get an idea of the degree of integration of the back office system.
Sure.
Between the B2B side and the B2B and the B2C side?
That's a fantastic question. It's something that we've been grappling with for years. Let me answer it in the best way possible. So all of our e-commerce properties are fulfilled out of the same exact fulfillment centers, as we call them. And our inventory is segregated between stores and the online experiences right now. So we also have distribution centers that replenish all of our store inventory positions. That's the situation right now. We have a new EVP that took over the reins of our supply chain organization last year. He comes to us from Amazon. One of the things that's very high on his list of priorities is to look at any further synergies that can happen between the online inventory and store inventory. So that's definitely on the cards, but right for now it's segregated. Ross, I don't know if you want to add anything else?
No, I think you covered that great. I mean, I think the concept right now is very distinct between a distribution center and a fulfillment center. Those are different entities. In very rare cases, do they cross over and share logistics roles, but that's an ever-changing scenario and something we'll obviously look at as we continue to deal with omni-channel and all of the features that our customers need.
All right, great question. Any other questions before we move on? All right. So I'd like to introduce you to the B2B challenge that we're here to talk about. One of the things that our customers also get being a B2B customer is that you as a B2B customer get to choose what your assortment should be. In other words, you get to decide what kind of products you want to see and what you don't want to see, right? And these are achieved by what we call blocking rules, which permit the visibility of products or product groups. I'll talk to you a little more in detail about what that means. But essentially, one of the challenges is that we are dealing with a very large volume of data, at least from what Staples sees. We're talking about 1.6 billion rules that have to be managed, processed in real time as the customer is on the website, right? So that's kind of what really our challenge is. How do we, kind of go through all of these rules and figure out what's the best product that a customer should be seeing or shouldn't be seeing as the customer's on the website placing an order. So the challenge is, how do you maintain site experience through all of this? Any questions? All right. So let me tell you a little more about the blocking rules, as we call it. So we have something called an inclusion rule and an exclusion rule at Staples. An inclusion rule is a rule that permits the visibility of a product that is generally not visible to other customers. All right, so that's inclusion. An exclusion rule, on the other hand, explicitly disables the view of a product that is typically visible to everybody, all customers. So that's what an inclusion rule and exclusion rule is. If you don't understand that, don't be surprised because I have an example. So an example of an inclusion rule is a proprietary logo T-shirt. So in this case, Burger Mania restaurants, who may be a customer of Staples, does not want any other customer ordering Burger Mania T-shirts. They just want to be able to have their employees log in and order these T-shirts. So you would have an inclusion rule that says, these specific proprietary logo T-shirts, which have a very specific SKU number, should be visible to only Burger Mania customers, right? And we know who those customers are. Exclusion rules, on the other hand, an example is furniture. So a customer may decide that Staples is not their preferred vendor for furniture. Maybe they use another vendor for furniture, so they do not want any of their employees ordering furniture. So they have an exclusion rule for the entire category called furniture, all right? Now, this can also get a little more complicated. You can have both of these rules play at the same time. So a product can be excluded as well as included at the same time. And we kind of decide what takes precedence based on some directives. So let me give you another example of what that looks like. So you could have a customer that says that they don't want to see any writing instruments for ordering except for ballpoint pens. So the exclusion rule in this case would be the category called writing instruments. The inclusion rule would be ballpoint pens. So that's a classic example of some of the challenges that we have here. Any questions? Sure.
The question is, you cited an inclusion rule of a T-shirt, which was a category I don't associate with Staples. So not only was it custom printed, which made it even more specific to that customer, but it may have been in a category, in this case T-shirts, that isn't stocked at all by the stores or the B2C online. So it really is a customer-specific SKU in a couple of ways. Not only is it screen printed a certain way, you've got a buyer that has to buy that.
Sure. Ross, you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've captured some of our challenge, even more clearly than we've articulated. It's proprietary items is one of our use cases. It's a big use case for us. We do have customers who want us to stock certain deviations of products for them and for them only. So whether it's a logo T-shirt in the custom print realm or a particular model of toner cartridge that no one really is buying, but they happen to have printers that work with it, we do organize that type of relationship with our customers so that we can serve them the best. We do have large variety of product offerings other than office supplies. So Sunil already mentioned, our business units in facilities and custom print and promotional products, which is this example. And we're offering all of those services to customers who want them. Our business challenge is obviously only offering it to the right customers because not everyone wants to buy everything from us. And it's even stricter than a preference in the B2B world because we're contractually obligated to offer the items that they want for purchase, but obviously with no intrusion on the categories or the types of products that they've decided not to purchase from Staples.
Well put, Ross. Thank you.
And what e-commerce web store software do you use?
That is a great question because that's something that I was going to talk about in our next slide here. So we've primarily been a customer of a large e-commerce company, and we've used their products across many of our e-commerce websites. The downside with that product being that it's monolithic. It's monolithic in nature, so just one big rock. Did not scale to a lot of our needs, wasn't agile enough, all of those things. And people that were familiar with the product also came at a premium because it was a premium skill set to get in the market. So what we decided was that we were going to set up our own e-commerce platform using a bunch of open source components. It was also going to be distributed in nature. And we were going to have this scale to our needs, be as open source as possible. So we've used a variety of components such as Java, Spring Boot, Netflix OSS components such as Eureka and Hystrix. We talked about Hystrix yesterday in one of the sessions, and Zool for edge routing. And we also put in a lot of glue code to make all of these components work together. So we have a solid platform in place. We're right now trying to build out what we call the CAS components, which is Commerce as a Service. We need to build out modules that support cart and checkout. We need to build out modules that support SKU page. We need to build modules that support inventory. So those are some of the examples. So as we were building our e-commerce platform, we realized that there was a need for a very fast, resilient, and scalable data store. And Couch seemed like the perfect fit for that. Because one of the reasons we needed it to be fast is because you're going to have hundreds of these microservices servicing your website. One of the mandates that we have, or rules in the organization, is that a microservice returns a response in no more than 50 milliseconds. So to make that happen, you needed a very, very fast data store, in addition to everything else being very efficient from an application side. So answer to your question, sir, is that right now we do use a product from a company, but we're trying to move towards an e-commerce, open source, distributed, microservices-based e-commerce platform. Any other questions? Sure.
So in your earlier slides, you mentioned about the rules chaining. So I would imagine you have some sort of rule engine somewhere here. And can you elaborate where's that particular technologies or components, recited in this architecture, if you will?
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons we're here to talk to you about, how do we manage all of these rules. So Ross is going to cover that in more detail in a subsequent slide. So I'm going to park that question for now.
Sure.
If you're okay with that. And there was a question back there. So the question is, are we using Cloud Foundry? So I believe we looked at Cloud Foundry, but decided to not use Cloud Foundry. We've been closely working with Pivotal on a lot of the rest of their stuff, but not Cloud Foundry. So we've been making it work with Spring Boot, Java. We have our own private cloud, so all of this sits within that from an infrastructure as a service perspective. We've also written a lot of code to make all of these components work. I'm sure I'm missing a lot of technologies, but we have a whole huge list of things that we've used in this. But if you're interested, I can definitely have a conversation after the session. All right, any other questions? Okay, so with that, yes, sir.
Get that approved. That last slide, the e-commerce yourself.
How did
you get that approved by management? The idea of doing that internally instead of going to an outside turnkey solution. Selling that to management was not easy, I'm assuming.
It's a great question, and it's something that we've spent the past 3 years in figuring out and arriving at a decision. And this was completely supported by management. It's the classic build versus buy. What do you want to do as a company? Our focus was there's not a single e-commerce platform out there that's completely microservices built, right? There are companies like Amazon and Netflix which build their own platforms, but it's for proprietary use. They don't really go out and sell it out. So one of the only options we had was to build this on our own. It's also cost effective in that there's a lot of capital investment, but unlike a regular product that you buy from a big company, you don't have to really pay licensing fees. You're not paying a premium for skill sets, all of those things. So it was a very active discussion that we had over the course of 3 years. I want to say that Staples as a company also prides itself in innovation. So there were a few different things that we tried on the side, some of which succeeded, some of which failed. But then we took all of the learnings from that and then put it into our next-gen platform, code-named Nefos. But great question. Thank you, sir. Any other questions before I? OK, so we're going to switch gears, and Ross is going to take it on from here.
Great.
Talk a little more about our specific use case.
Yeah. So as Sunil said, our application technology choices are never taken lightly, and we analyze, each and every component of the stack to make sure we're picking, the best in breed and the product that works best for our use cases and our needs and satisfies all of our both functional and non-functional requirements. And so Couchbase at that data store layer is really a great fit for us. And that was a careful analysis to come to that conclusion. So some of the many reasons I'm sure you've heard in all the other meetings that you've attended today and are going to attend later. But our specific highlights on why Couchbase is ideal is kind of on this slide. So we really have embraced its ability to handle both read and writes with equal grace. So there's a real strong ability for Couchbase to be able to take in updates to the data and reflect those to our service components in real time or near real time. And that's a big, strong win for us. We also can do things in NoSQL just inherently that you can't do as easily or as gracefully in the relational database world. So this ability to query JSON and the structure on that JSON is something that's really powerful. And whether you use NoSQL or not, we're able to combine all of our structures into a complex form and be able to use it as kind of a unit, as opposed to having to fetch from a variety of tables and figure what it all means. Another big benefit for us, which is kind of inherent to Couchbase, is the MRU, or the most recently used algorithm. All right, we have the number Sunil quoted is 1.6 billion things we're trying to keep track of. Keeping that all memory resident is not necessarily going to be something we're capable of doing. So if we're going to make a choice, we'd rather have the customers that are active, the users that are active, and their rules be front and center. So we get the best response time as the system gets used, because the data that needs to be the most accessible is going to float to the top and give us easy access and super lightning fast response times as it gets reused and needed again. Another issue is related to that is the spillover. I mean, if we do need disk as a back end for any of that data, the abstraction for us to be able to deal with in-memory or out-of-memory components without having to write code is a great appeal. There's no change in what we do from a coding perspective. The Couchbase software is doing the heavy lifting of figuring out what needs to be done to get us our data. Horizontally scaling is another a giant win for us with Couchbase. We can scale, horizontally. And Sunil mentioned, our current platform, our legacy e-commerce structure being a monolith. And this is one area that Couchbase is such a powerhouse, is being able to grow instead of just building bigger, faster, more CPUs, more memory, trying to build some, Watson supercomputer. We're able to build out kind of the layman machines, common, cloud components, and just scale with as many of those machines as we need. We don't have to necessarily invest in giant computers that do everything. We're big users of the NoSQL language. I think you've probably heard, I wouldn't even be close to representing as well as Couchbase has covered that topic, but the NoSQL language is just a fantastic interface to an underlying data, and it's so familiar to us, people like me that are developers in nature, because it's something we're used to. It's so familiar, so easy to understand that you can get people up and running with it very quickly and using this product effectively. The next point is on the replication. We do have a disaster recovery need in Staples. We want to make sure that if something were to happen to our primary data center, which is an internal cloud, as Sunil mentioned, if that were to have some type of a long-running issue, whether that be in like the power space or the networking space or something that that needed immediate remedy, we do have a simultaneous data center in the Boulder area, which enables us to recover from that outage and still service customers. And having the data automatically be synced and kept, seamlessly up to date with the XDCR replication enables us to have confidence that if we had to pull that switch and switch over to our secondary data center, customers would, have identical experience to the servers and the services that they were using previously. They'll get the correct assortment as we laid out our problem immediately as that secondary website comes up and starts taking over traffic of the Needham data center, which is our primary network operation center. And then last, on kind of the highlights of our Couchbase choice is the monitoring capabilities. We need to obviously be able to track a plethora of metrics and response times that Sunil mentioned, and any of the other non-functional needs are served so well by Couchbase just internally and inherently that we're able to not have to write as much operational code to keep the system live and keep it running and keeping it running healthy. We have near instant access to so many key measurements and performance indicators that we know when we need to scale and we know how we would need to scale and all of those other great intrinsics from Couchbase. And so there's probably a dozen other reasons. I don't want to keep going, but any questions on any of these on why Couchbase was ideal? Either? Yep, 2 people. Thank you.
I'm just curious, what kind of current infrastructure and technology stack right now you have? Because it looks like you didn't mention that.
Okay.
For in running your monolithic app. And the other question is, how do you? It looks like I went to staples.com.
Yeah.
There's no way right now a separate B2B portal or sub-portal for business customers.
Okay.
So if that's the case, how do you differentiate or distinguish between average individual customer versus a business customer? How do you detect that?
Okay.
That is, this is a business.
Sure.
He's shopping for the business, but he can make he or she make shopping from anywhere, right?
Thank you. Yes. Well, we're covering more the Couchbase angle right now, so we can definitely go into all of our stack components and all the technology that's in use.
No. Are you still using mainframe or things like that?
Our backend is an iSeries mainframe. Our eCommerce site is a commercial product right now that's kind of this monolithic, eCommerce suite. The microservices architecture is something we're trying to roll out and service all of that functionality in, and we're specifically talking about the item assortment functionality being essentially its own application that we can deploy and roll out and upgrade and deal with very separately from the main application.
So you are trying to do migration from a traditional infrastructure like technology stack as well as infrastructure to cloud-native microservice-based.
Correct.
Immutable architecture.
You've hit the nail right on the head.
By taking advantage of working with them, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And in terms of the customer identification, that is obviously another fantastic question. Currently, the segregation is very distinct, so different URLs service different types of customers. So the Staples.com website definitely has links to Staples Advantage, which is the B2B portal, as you said. But the B2B customers kind of know already to go to Staples Advantage directly. So they're separate URLs, separate entities, and we're working to bridge that more graciously or gracefully. But right now they're separate websites. Thank you.
I've got 2 questions. First is how do you handle the ASIC compliant transactions, for example, here, during customer checkout using Couchbase? Second question has to do with your XDCR. So you mentioned this is a DR only, so I was assuming that would be a active passive, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so if so, then would you care to talk about when you have a write failure in your primary data centers, and how do you handle the situation? What are the the fallback options and so forth, without impacting the customer experience?
Okay, sure. I'll do my best. The use case we're dealing with at this point is, we'll get into these in the future slides, but it's a little more batch-oriented at this point in time. So there's kind of a load process, and the write operations are generally segregated to that type of portion of the system, and then the reads occur, kind of throughout the day as that application is running. So we haven't quite run into any type of a transactional issue, and we're not using this as a system of record at this particular point in time. The cart and checkout domain, like you've mentioned, would have that challenge. This particular microservice at this point in time does not. So it has other systems of record that are backing this data. So that particular challenge is not one we've had to necessarily cover in this scenario. I don't know if, Sunil, if you had other domain expertise that you could bring on that topic.
Well, no, I don't want to open up a whole can of worms, but one of the things that, we've talked about this very topic to, our architects and engineers in Couchbase. And one of the things that Couchbase promises is eventual consistency. There's always going to be a trade-off, and, you've got to measure and tailor it to your specific need. So I'll just leave it at that and say that, it's a challenge that we're working on actively.
The last point I'll make on that is some of our document modeling is catered to making sure that all of the data that's represented is in one document. So we're not necessarily trying to maintain, a particular operation that needs to update that document, needing to write multiple documents and spread that information across different records. So therefore, you kind of get atomic nature by encapsulating all of that data in a single entity that gets updated and either succeeds in writing or doesn't write. Did I answer your question? Thank you. Okay.
If you have slides you've got to get through and you need to cut the questions, you can cut me off. But in the lead up to the decision about Couchbase, there must have been a sequence of decisions that led up to this. The question is, did you make a decision to go with a NoSQL database, irrespective of which one, at an earlier time? And then it became a question of, well, which of the multiple available NoSQL databases do I want to pick from? Is that how you did it? And then when you had the, what do they call it, the horse race of NoSQL databases, what did Couchbase have to compete against, and why did it win versus other NoSQL databases?
Another great question. I think that is our progression. I think we went from, a general theme of technology we were seeking, and NoSQL had some of these advantages inherently, and then it was, as you said, a horse race or a bake-off or whatever you want to call it, to decide which of the variants, on the market served us best. And I don't know if we're at liberty to talk about all the particulars, so I'll leave it to Sunil to try and tell you how that rundown occurred.
Well, yeah, the gist of it is that, yes, it was a journey, definitely. There was an innate need to move towards NoSQL databases. We did identify, our preference was to go with one of the widely available NoSQL databases. We prototyped it in production, things went live, didn't really scale to our needs. And we were very quick to pick up the pieces and shift to Couchbase. So yes, we did experiment with at least one other technology before switching to Couchbase.
Okay, so on to what we're using. On to the specifics of our problem as much as we can. For this particular microservice in this use case, what we're storing in the Couchbase infrastructure is those block rules that the very large number that Sunil already talked about. And we're organizing them very carefully. So based on the way we're accessing the data, the way we've modeled it, the way we've orchestrated our architecture is kind of hand in hand, because we've tried to look in how the application needs the data in the way we design the storage of that data. So a lot of the data is broken down, and we're dealing with really two very large pieces of data. We're dealing with kind of the customer aspect, and then we're also dealing with the product aspect. So that's kind of the tough formula here that we're trying to bridge. It's a very large join when you look at it, because we have lots of customers and we have lots of products, and we're trying to figure out, based on those two entities, what it is we can sell you and what we don't want to sell you, so that we can pull it away and not try and sell it to you by accident. So some of those are done by kind of a hierarchy of the customer. So an example is like a region. So in cases, a classic example for us is, and probably I'm using the wrong audience, is Poland spring water is something in the East Coast that's a very popular product, but it's not something that's sold on the West Coast. So that's something we have to handle inherently, so that we don't offer any West Coast customers Poland spring water. Another thing is specific to the customer. So those preferences of what our customers have asked for is something we need to account for in terms of what they've asked us to restrict or not allow for purchase, and taking in all those preferences and building out that chain. And then there's other things like the SKU attributes, who makes the product and what its capabilities are that we need to account for. So in the total, we have 14 facets of customer and 20 facets of product, and we're using kind of the flexible arrays of JSON and Couchbase itself to blend that together. This is kind of that current context diagram of what we're dealing with. It's kind of the brute force approach. We're trying to deal with all of the data, stored it in a relational database, and deliver it to our front-end application as quickly as possible. We also need that same functionality to be available to our order management system for phone and fax orders, and deliver that seamlessly. So to transform that, the way we've worked with Couchbase is we've taken the microservice approach that we've tried to carefully articulate, and we're using this pipe to take all the data that we need and push it into Couchbase, and then we write our microservice architecture on top of that. We're giving you some performance metrics to kind of go along with that as we process that data, and how quickly we're able to refresh that data source every time we need to give more accurate information. And as Sunil said, our journey it talks about transforming this even more. And one of the things we're really looking to do is change that structure and take that data highway and actually shift it over here, so that instead of trying to process kind of a denormalized set of data, we're actually able to take the raw rules type of data and operate that on in real time. And that would mean doing a lot of the rules engine stuff that was already asked about, and doing a lot of prioritization and understanding of how to interpret those rules and apply it to the request objects that are coming into us. And so that's definitely one of our shifts that we're looking for. And Nickel helps us do that very well. We have a lot of array functions that we're hoping to use and performance testing at this stage to try and operate more on the raw data and less on the denormalized data, and give us that right approach. And so that's where we're working to it. We'll try and point all of our legacy systems to that microservice architecture when that stage is complete, and we'll be closer to finishing our journey and using kind of the most modern architecture and the best technical products we can find, of which Couchbase is a key component. I think we're almost out of time. Did anyone have any questions on on the overall. Yes.
Yeah, I'm curious about your data center in Boulder, is it?
Yes.
Is that a standby data center, or is that like a multi-master?
Yeah, it was an active, passive infrastructure, as was alluded to.
Okay.
So we're using Needham as our primary data center. Only in the case of a real emergency would we shift all the traffic to our other data center.
And how often do you test that?
I think we're contractually obligated to test that twice a year. Sometimes we do that more often. I don't know, Sunil, if you have more information.
No, I mean, essentially, yeah, Boulder is just a DR site for us. It's passive at most times. We keep it up to date, and yeah, that's.
Are you able to solve all the search use case using Nickel, or do you store data somewhere else to do any searching?
It's a fantastic question.
It is. Our goal is to actually make search more simple for in terms of the power of that functionality, and put more of the power in this service. So we're trying to keep assortment out of search as a kind of a future architectural state. Currently, it has to apply some of the same logic on the search results from the get-go. It's something, again, Couchbase could potentially help us with down the road to try and make it so that we can use the right data at the right position in the application flow.
So you are not right now, for some queries you don't go to Couchbase. That's what.
I mean, some of the at this point in time, some of the data is kind of pre-filtered. So search does some of this assortment logic up front, and then we are the final answer on can you show this on the screen or not once search has identified that that's one of the products that matches the user's input term.
Okay, thank you.
Have you had to hire specialists to do some of this work, either as employees or as contractors?
So by some of the work, you mean? Do you mean?
I mean,
the
as
actual,
opposed to leaning on Couchbase, the company, unless you had expertise in all this stuff beforehand, you needed to supplement it.
I can take that if you want.
Yeah, go for it.
So yeah, I mean, we've Staples obviously is a large company, so we've been busy trying to set up a center of excellence around Couchbase. We have trained DBAs, in Couchbase, so they are well versed with it. But one of the things that we're also trying to do going forward is to partner very strongly with Couchbase from a consultancy perspective. Some of the challenges that we are approaching with regards to solving a lot of these commerce-related problems is best served by someone that's gone through it. So we are very actively looking at Couchbase to help us with solve some of these problems. But from a skill sets perspective, yes, we are trying to build up an operational skill set in-house so that they can take care of the Couchbase solution.
I think in general, the microservice journey is using a lot of commodity technologies that a lot of developers are versed in, as opposed to a commercial product from the application layer that requires intense familiarity with and specific domain expertise with. So we think this will enable our developers to more quickly get up to speed and do development quicker. And that's one of our pushes for this technology choice.
So sort of two-part question. One is, could you talk a little bit more about, right here?
Sorry, it's very bright, I'm sorry. Oh, no, I got it.
No worries, yeah. So first is, could you talk a little bit about, how your Couchbase is deployed, like what kind of hardware is it running, cluster sizes? You talked about 2 data centers, active, passive, but if you could describe a little more about how it's deployed and, it's on a VM or something like that. That's one. And the second is, have you had any sort of challenges with Couchbase, like operationally, or maybe, just in your day-to-day kind of management, and or maybe it was initial sizing, or something like that. So if you could, you talked about the benefits, but have you had any challenges? So that would be useful to hear.
Yeah, I mean, The private cloud infrastructure that we're using is internal right now. So we're using a way of provisioning those machines and delivering that infrastructure dynamically very quickly. I don't know if you have more comments on that angle of the question.
So I think as far as the performance results go, they were on an 8-node cluster, I believe, of Couchbase, and we've been working on some math to do what is it going to take to have the entire 3 TB, the 1.6 billion rules that you see translates to 3 terabytes of data. What is it going to take to have all of it 100%? Working set in memory, right? Which is kind of ridiculous according to me, but we have some numbers from that. I don't know if we can share any of that, but we've been looking at some early performance results that are very promising. So I'll leave it at that as far as that particular question is concerned. Challenges with Couchbase, absolutely. I think the biggest challenge we've had with Couchbase, I will say, is our lack of expertise in understanding how powerful the product is. There have been several emails that I had to send off to Chris Neff, who's our account executive over in the East Coast, saying, hey, we have this big problem, and there's concerns from our leadership around, if Couchbase can serve this particular need. And he's been there 2 days later with Alex, down there to have discussions and help us out. So I would say that, was our biggest challenge. The idea is obviously to partner more closely with Couchbase going forward.
Yeah, I think that's the gist of it. I mean, we haven't had any particular technical hurdles, so it's worked very well. And thank you. I think that's all the time we have. Thank you very much for attending, and we sure enjoyed it. We'll stay around if anyone has further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.